Hello and welcome. My name is Sarah Russell and I welcome you here today for this very special, truly global patient summit to celebrate World Ostomy Day, which is actually tomorrow, so we are ahead of the game. We'll be taking questions at the end, so if you have anything you want to ask us, please put that in the Q&A section of your chat, which is just in a chat box at the bottom, but make sure you put that in the Q&A section and we'll come to that in the last 15 minutes. So I really hope you enjoy this conversation. We have got a really exciting panel, truly global speakers for you today. So every 3 years, ostomy organisations around the world celebrate World Ostomy Day. And the 2nd of October, tomorrow, is the 10th time this special event has taken place. This year's motto is Ostomates' rights are human rights, anytime and anywhere. And that's what we're going to be talking about today in this session, in relation to developing healthy bonds around our stoma and as we go through our surgery and then our recovery and our life with living with an ostomy. Convatec have asked me to celebrate World Ostomy Day by bringing together some truly special people in the global ostomy community to discuss healthy bonds, what this means and how it can be helpful for people living with an ostomy or about to have ostomy surgery. So let me introduce your panel. So my name is Sarah Russell. I am here in the UK. I'm a clinical exercise specialist, clinical Pilates teacher and cancer rehabilitation specialist. I'm the author of a pioneering book called The Bowel Cancer Recovery Toolkit and a global exercise consultant for Convatec. I've had my ostomy for 11 years, which was formed as an emergency due to perforated diverticular disease. I'm a mother of 2 grown-up boys. I love dogs, outdoor adventures, hiking, cycling, running, and I've recently completed my 38th marathon. But really my passion is about rehabilitation and exercise and movement and helping people get back to the lives that they want to live with their ostomy. So next up, we have Helen Farrell. Helen is not only just a good friend of mine, but she is also an amazing counsellor and therapist. She's a mental health counsellor. She lives in Ireland over here in the UK, and she's had her stoma since 2004 as a result of Crohn's disease. She started a stoma charity here in the UK many years ago, which really is aligned to her passion about helping people live an active and healthy life. She's experienced in working with long-term medical conditions and health-related issues, and she enjoys running, runs marathons, being outdoors, and reading. Okay, and next up, we have Ellil, and Ellil is in Singapore, and Ellil is the president of the Ostomy Association of Singapore, and he's incredibly passionate about supporting people with disability, and he's actively involved in social work. He's the co-chair of the Singapore Patient Advocacy Network. He's the patient ambassador, and he's a double cancer survivor and has had a stoma since 2016. Okay, and next, and finally, your 4th panelist today is Dr. Mehesh. Dr. Mehesh is in Kuala Lumpur, and he is a general and colorectal surgeon. He's the founder and past president of the Colorectal Cancer Survivorship Society in Malaysia. He's the president of the European Ostomy Association and the former president of the Malaysian Society of Colorectal Surgeons. And he's the former president and chairman of the organising committee of the Asia Pacific Federation of Coloproctology. So he is a really eminent and influential surgeon, and it's a pleasure to have all of our speakers here today with us. So first of all, I want to show you a video that has been produced by Convatec for World Ostomy Day for 2021.
This is my life now.
This is my life now.
Come on, Maximilian!
And it is going to be amazing.
This is my life now.
This is my life now.
This is my life.
This is my life now.
This is my life now.
We can do, be, and live our life to the fullest.
She is just having a blast swimming right now with her ostomy.
I never thought I'd be my normal self. Turns out I'm a better version of myself.
This is my life now.
I feel so much more powerful in my day-to-day of what I can do. Spending a lot of quality time with my loved ones.
This is my life now with Healthy Bond.
I'm very, very, very grateful for it.
This is my life, creating healthy bonds.
This is my life with healthy bonds.
This is my life with healthy bonds. And my cup tea.
We believe that when you have a healthy bond with your stoma, you have a healthy bond to life.
I love that video. I think it's really great, and I think we can all relate to the guy in the bed at the beginning who is really feeling quite alone and isolated and quite depressed. And I know when I had my surgery, I was in hospital and I looked down and I saw this bag and I thought, gosh, what does this mean? What is my life going to be like now? And prior to that, I'd been a runner and a triathlete, and I really didn't know whether I was going to be able to do those things again or not. And it can be, especially if it's an emergency, like it was in my case, quite a shocking process to go through. What I've realized over the years, like the people in that video, is that by having good relationships and having good support around you, it doesn't have to be like that, and you can live your life and do the things that you want to do. There are, of course, many challenges, and not everybody feels that positive about their ostomy. So we want to discuss that today. But we also want to look at how these healthy bonds and having positive thinking can change our relationship with our stoma, and they can help us. So let's first start by talking about Ellil and Helen, who both have ostomies. And I would like you just to share what happened, how you got to have an ostomy. Just tell us a little bit about that and tell us a bit about your journey to the ostomy. So Ellil, if I could start with you, please.
Thanks, Sarah. So my journey started 10 years ago. And I was quite sure it's because of my unhealthy lifestyle, although I was pretty active. But I had some problems with my bowel movement, and then eventually started bleeding quite profusely when passing motion. And of course, went to see the doctors and the specialists, and went to do the scope, and they found out that I had a tumor which was very close to my anus, and the only way they could sort of take care of it was to have it removed and install a stoma. So it's quite a shock for me when I learned that I had rectal cancer, and then on top of that, I had to have a stoma, and a permanent one at that. So since then, I've learned to accept my stoma, and I've learned to do everything I do with it, and of course with a lot of help from a lot of people around me. And I guess later on we'll be talking about bonds, and I think it's really about building so many bonds with so many different people that has helped me to come this far today.
Lovely, thank you. So Helen, can you share your story to how you got to have an ostomy?
Yeah, absolutely. I got sick in 2004 and had actually a very short pathway to surgery. So I developed symptoms, lots of abdominal pain and urgent trips to the loo with blood, a bit like Ellil was saying. And I was admitted to hospital and had about a month's worth of medical treatment, which didn't actually help matters really. So then I had to go and have an early ostomy operation. Was life-saving ultimately. And that was about 17 and a half years ago. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, but I've been really well since.
That's brilliant, thank you. And Dr. Mehesh, can you just tell us briefly about how you got to be a specialist colorectal surgeon and what drew you to that profession?
Thank you for the kind invitation, and thank you, Sarah. And as regards to how I got into the specialty, I just felt that basically colorectal surgery it's a field which is it's very stimulating. It is it's rewarding, and I suppose the other word to use would be it's truly humbling as well. It's stimulating us because we encounter a multitude of surgical cases, and some which are truly complex. it is rewarding because there's nothing better than seeing a patient recover post-surgery, particularly when it's cancer-related in operation. And I always like the word humbling, primarily because I always believe that it's not us, that we all governed by the big man up there who basically it's all in his hands, and who oversees what we do, and we're just tools that he guides us through. And I think the other good thing about this specialty essentially is that it allows me to work with various other health care professionals and allied health specialties which share the same sentiments as I do. And that's basically it. So just the passion that I had right from the onset. So I've been a colorectal surgeon for close to about 20 years now. And I hope to serve at least for a good another 10 years, hopefully.
That's brilliant. I love that. I love that ethos. I love use the word humbling as well. And I think there's certainly the work I've done with patients over the last few years and my own personal story has kind of led me to feel that, that people have an ostomy for so many different reasons. And I didn't know what an ostomy was when I had my surgery, so I was there on my phone Googling, thinking, what on earth is this thing? And what is diverticular disease? And what do these things mean? I didn't even know, because mine was an emergency situation. So, but I've subsequently learned that people have ostomies for so many different reasons. And it could be something that could happen to anybody and any of us tomorrow. So we're all, as well as Ellil and Helen both having ostomies, you also work in sort of professional capacity with ostomy patients, a bit like myself in the rehab sort of phase. So Helen, just share with us a little bit about your work and how you've used your own personal experience to kind of draw you into the work you do with patients.
Yeah, I was really lucky after my surgery. I adapted very fast, and I think the key to that was lots of really open and transparent conversations with family and friends and colleagues. And it was kind of a shock to me when I started volunteering for a charity related to ostomies, to learn that actually my experience was really unusual, and a lot of people really didn't feel they were adjusting as positively as they wanted to. So that kind of led me really into the work that I do and have done for the last maybe 10, 12 years, which is to try and help people come to a point where they feel comfortable with how their life is now with their ostomy.
Yeah, and you do that work as a counsellor and a therapist, don't you?
Right, yeah.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think my experience was very similar. I had that initial shock and then a very quick acceptance of my ostomy and a very quick return to being able to go running and doing all the things that I wanted to do. And it was quite shocking when I realized that other people didn't necessarily experience that or feel the same way. And we've talked about this a lot together in the past, but I know that, that perhaps the journey of why someone has an ostomy can really shape and frame that recovery. We see a lot of people with Crohn's and colitis, they've been ill for many years. They then have their ostomy and their life is better. They can eat, they can do things, they're not in pain, and their quality of life improves, but that's not the case for everyone. And particularly for cancer patients, sometimes it's a huge shock. You were well, now you've got cancer, and now you've also got a stoma, and that can be really difficult. Ellil, could you just talk a little bit about that, actually, your experience as a cancer patient, but also the professional and volunteering work that you do?
Right. So I think, Sarah, you're absolutely right. I had my stoma because of cancer, but in a sense, it was also easier to accept because to me it was a life-saving surgery. Because if left unchecked, it probably just get bigger and spread to other parts of the body. So in that sense, I am like you and Helen. Acceptance came early, and the rehabilitation started really early. So, but you're right. Not many are as quick to accept and adapt because it's quite a shock to them. Sometimes there are no symptoms, and they find they have this bowel issue, and then the only solution is to have a stoma, whether it's permanent or temporary. And yeah, so professionally, I am not, into any kind of counseling. All the work that I do is voluntary. I'm in the securities industries, if anyone is curious, professionally. So, but the work I do really was, my main motivation was when I first had my ostomy, I had no support. I didn't know where to go. and I think I've mentioned this before, the first point of support for me was the internet. And through the internet, it was Ostomy UK who actually reached out to me and sent me a bunch of resources via snail mail. And I was so thankful, right? It really, really helped me in those early days. And one of my main motivations for doing what I do now, reaching out and helping patients who have already got ostomies or who are about to have ostomies, is that to provide the support when needed, all right? Because it can be so frightening.
Yeah, I think that, that the guy in the bed at the beginning of the video, sort of feeling very alone and feeling very isolated. And I think one of the biggest challenges we all face is a lot of people don't even know what a stoma is and why it's there and why people have them. So I think days like World Ostomy Day and the advocacy work that we all do is really important to raise that awareness. Dr. Mehesh, can you just perhaps share with us some of the experiences you've had when you tell a patient they're going to need an ostomy and what their response is?
Well, I think it's, in my practice, actually, most ostomates are patients who've, have battled cancer. And obviously, we know the various indications. There are various other indications of ostomies as well. And IBDs or with, diverticulitis, the variety. But most, without a doubt, most patients would have some degree of pathology like cancers, which need address. Now, so when someone's diagnosed with cancer, as we know, it's not just a patient, it's basically the entire family, something goes through a roller coaster ride, And obviously, in adding on to the fact that you're going to have a stoma on top of that, it's like a, it's like a double whammy hit. It's just not an easy thing to take. So essentially, they may overcome even the issues of the cancer, but living with a stoma is something. It's a life-changing, fact altogether. So essentially, it's always imperative that we sit down and explain to patients prior to that, so that their acceptance of stomas make it easier. And obviously, we as surgeons, we work very closely with the enterostomal therapists as well, which I think they play a crucial role. And I always like this little dictum that we as surgeons, we may add years to a patient's life, but the enterostomal therapists, they add life to the years. And essentially, it's imperative that they have a good understanding with not just with ourselves as clinicians, but even the ET nurses and so on. So it is not an easy thing to handle. It is a life-changing thing. Everyone goes through this. I mean, some will accept it in an easier manner. Some will take longer for them to accept living in the stoma. So there are challenges that people encounter, and obviously we know for a fact that a lot of these challenges can be made more tricky or difficult if one to encounter problems with the stoma, complications of the stoma. Acceptance becomes more difficult in those circumstances,
So just you're talking about the relationship with yourself as a surgeon, but also the relationship with the nurses that work within your team. And that can be a really important support and one of the first healthy bonds that we develop when we have our first, when we have ostomy surgery. One of the first people we often see is our ostomy nurse, and they're there to help us change the bag and learn how to use the appliance and advise us about nutrition and fluids and all the things that are really important when you have an ostomy. So that's really interesting. That brings me on very nicely to my next question about those kind of first bonds and why they're so important. And so Ellil and Helen, if you could just think about, what were the first bonds that you created and who were they with and why were they so important for you? So Ellil, if you could go first.
Yes. And yes, I think these bonds are really important. And for me, looking back, the most important bonds the initial bonds that I formed were with my fellow support group members. Because my first encounter with them was really a year after I had my stoma. Before that, I never met a single person who had an ostomy. And when I was introduced into the group, the people that I met, number one, they were so warm and welcoming when I joined the support group. And when I got to know them better, we were able to share stories, even intimate details that I don't think I could have discussed even with a stoma nurse at that point. And it gave me a lot of confidence to broach those subjects boldly when I saw my doctor next to my stoma nurse again. And yes, I think I will put it down to the bonds with my fellow ostomates in the support group for me. And that was really very important.
And but that didn't come for a year until after you had your surgery, right? So how were you feeling in that first year? Were you, before you had that connection and met those people?
Oh yeah, so if we can call it that, my bond was with the internet actually. And of course, the resources that I got, via the mail, and I guess you can say that I had to develop this bond with my stoma, how to deal with it, how to manage it, to get used to all the funny things that happen, throughout the day. And I was quite fortunate that I had very understanding employers who let me go on medical leave as long as I needed it. So I had a lot of time to get to know, to learn, to like, and even love my stoma. And as I said, acceptance came easy for me because it was a life-saving surgery. So I didn't resent it or anything like that. So I guess if the question was for that.
I like that relationship. We're talking about bonds with other people, but actually the bond with our stoma and acceptance of our stoma is really underpins all of this, doesn't it? Helen, what about you? What about the bonds you made at the beginning, and what was most helpful for you, I guess?
I think for me, I was really lucky to have interaction with so many different professionals right from the beginning. The hospital where I was treated, they kind of approached it from a medical and surgical point of view right from the beginning. So each day I had conversations with medical staff and surgical staff. And I had no idea that was unusual. It's only since I've had my surgery that I realised most people don't get that kind of joined up approach. They're kind of dealt with primary staff to begin with, and then they're sort of passed to the surgeons later on and medical treatment stopped. But it was very much a team effort in my case, and it meant that I could really ask all sorts of questions and somebody was always going to be able to answer them. And for me, that was the key. I wanted to have as many conversations as I could, and I became known as the patient with the notebook, and I had this notebook on my hospital table, and all through the day I'd just be writing questions as they occurred to me. And then when they did their round, they'd take a deep breath and they'd be like, right, here we go. Well, how many questions have you got for us today? And I always has I was asking if I could see stoma nurses and dietitians and physios, and I just wanted to get as much information as I possibly could. So my bonds at the beginning definitely were with all the medical staff that I could possibly get access. I was really fortunate that the hospital I was treated in was superb at making sure that there was a really multidisciplinary team approach and that I had as much information as I needed. So that was kind of so key for me in adjusting, because I could really feel that when I came into the surgery, I knew what to expect to a degree. And then on the other side of surgery, the same thing, I was kind of doing the same thing in audit. I was relaying information to my colleagues and my friends and family, and that then helped them understand. I think that level of transparency actually really helped those relationships in all sorts of ways, not just for me and my stoma.
And you've told the story to me, I know, in the past, but could you just share that story of when you went back to work and how you told everyone about your stoma?
Yeah, at the time that I had my surgery, I was managing quite a large team, and I've obviously got very suddenly and very seriously sick, and I was off for quite a long time. I was off for several months. So when I came back, I knew there was a bit of intrigue about what had happened, and maybe that it was a bit icky and, a bit one of those things that no one really wants to talk about. We talk about in whispers. So I just gathered everyone in the office and I said, look, this is what's happened. And I handed out loads of leaflets and pictures and showed them my bag, not my bag necessarily, but, a bag. And just kind of said, this is what I've had done. This is your time to ask questions. If there's anything that you're curious about, go for it. Almost nothing is too personal. And that definitely really helped.
I think that's quite, I won't use the word brave, but as that is a really, you're really advocating for yourself there with all of that, when you're asking questions and demanding answers and making notes. And I guess not a lot of patients are like that. Maybe you're quite unusual like that. And I think perhaps, going into the work environment is a fantastic way to do that. But probably a lot of people don't feel comfortable to do that, maybe for a number of different reasons. But what we're talking about there is really advocating for yourself and advocating for your needs. And that kind of fits very much with the theme of this World Ostomy Day, which is about patients' rights. And the European Ostomy Association have got a published charter of Ostomates' rights, which I have to admit, I didn't actually know about until we started working on this project for this today. And I've read through them, and they're actually incredibly important bullet points that we all need to advocate for throughout our whole journey. And it sounds like you had excellent care, but I'm not entirely sure that everybody gets that same level of care. So let's have a look. Okay, so for me, I think Helen and I met early in my journey after ostomy surgery, but I remember coming home from hospital and feeling very isolated. I didn't know anyone who had a stoma. Mine was emergency. I didn't know what it even was. And surgeon and the stoma nurse were great, but I was most concerned about whether I was going to be able to run again or do my activities again or lead the life that I had. So I Googled and I found a mountaineer called Rob Hill who had recently climbed Mount Everest. And I thought, oh, well, if you can climb Mount Everest when you've got an ostomy, then I'm pretty sure you can go for a run. And that was kind of all I needed to know. And I reached out to Rob and he messaged me back. He's a Canadian advocate, works in a lot of ostomy associations in Canada. He emailed me back. And for me, that was probably my first bond that I got, that role model. And I'm still in contact with him to this day. And that was what I needed at that point, someone who could show me that life was possible afterwards. And yeah, that was really helpful for me. So let's look at the kind of other side of that. So think about our surgeries and what happened immediately afterwards in those first weeks or months. Was there something that was missing that you would, if you look back, you would say, right, this would have really helped me at that point? Ellil, if you go first. I mean, obviously you had to reach out to a UK Ostomy Society to get information, but was there anything else? I mean, anything else within that process that would have helped you?
Yes, I think so. And for me, I wasn't like modern climbing or anything like you and running like Helen was. Although I did my fair share of marathons, but I was very active. And one of the things I wish I had known was about the development of a stoma. My mistake. The development of the peristal hernia. And having a stoma and just doing, daily activities, even like vacuuming and, just doing normal stuff. I did not know that a peristal hernia could form. And I really didn't know about all this until I had developed one. And so I wish I had been told that just to prevent this from happening. All right. So for me, that was the main thing. And now I really do advocate, every chance I get to tell people that, look, this can be prevented and so on. So that is the main thing, right? To talk about other things can happen while you're dealing with the stoma and not just managing the stoma itself. Yes.
Yeah, and that's something that we hear so many times from other people in the ostomy community about peristomal hernia development, and it seems to be one of the biggest things that people want to know about, actually. A lot of the work that I do is around abdominal rehabilitation and safe exercising. And the way I talk to people about it is we don't want to create fear with people. So there's a very fine balance. We don't want to say to people, don't lift, don't do abdominal exercises, be very careful when you do strenuous things, because then they're scared to move and they're fearful of exercise. But on the other hand, we don't want to ignore it, like, no one gave you any information, or equally just tell people to get on with their lives and do what they want. There's a sweet spot in the middle somewhere where we respect the surgery we've had, respect the ostomy, respect the rehabilitation process, but not let it limit our lives and the way we want to live. So Dr. Mehesh, if you could just maybe talk a little bit about peristomal hernias. We could talk all day about peristomal hernias, but what would be the sort of main advice you would give? So if Ellil had been your patient, what advice would he have got from you about peristomal hernias?
I think first and foremost is it's important for us to understand why these ever arise in the first place. I think, realistic, if I could just take a step back and just explain that, many times when someone presents to us, for example, a cancer case or the matter, there's so much focus and attention being, discussed regards to the cancer treatment and very little regards to the stoma. Because obviously cancer is cancer after all, and so even in terms like, for example, someone I may talk to them all they want in terms of how we're going to approach it surgically and what's the role of chemotherapy or radiation therapy if there's ever going to be need of that. And I do touch on the stoma. But if I look back, most of the time patients, there will be very minimal questions focused on stoma, but it's more focused towards the cancer treatment itself. Mm-hmm. But that's why, apart from my explanation, it's also important to have the ET nurses on board, and they do sort of be an adjunct in my course of discussion. So I think, what I'm saying essentially is a lot of focus and discussion mainly on the primary pathology. And the same thing applies when it comes to surgery as well. Now, realistically, we as surgeons, again, when we go in for surgery, there's a lot of focus in terms of removing the primary pathology. Again, whether it's a cancer disease or inflammatory bowel disease, whatever it may be. So that's always a focus of attention. Now, stomas are created at the tail end of the procedure, right? When everyone's probably exhausted and tired. Obviously, in certain institutions, for example, the teaching institutions, sometimes the junior staff, they scrub in and they do in the stoma creation again. I mean, that's fine. I think there's nothing wrong. Everyone has to learn somewhere, but as long as it's being done in the supervision. So what I'm saying, essentially, the root of a lot of these problems, there are a lot of variables involved. They may be patient-related factors, but a lot of it falls down to the way it's being tackled or surgery being formed as well. So I think essentially a lot of emphasis has been placed in terms of how the procedure is being conducted, and not just focusing in terms of closing the abdomen, having good cosmosis scar and stuff like that. So coming back to the issue of peristomal hernias, again, I think the crunch of it all, as we know, stomas have to be created in a right position. And where stomas, as far as iostomies or the sigmoid colostomy is concerned, they are usually created in the summit of the bowel's infraumbilical, within the rectus muscle. That's a key thing. So in order to avoid any problems of any problems like a stoma herniation for that matter, I think it's also important to stress that it's been done in the right position. So the root of all these problems essentially is to make sure that the proper principles are being taken in terms of creating the stoma. Now, as regards to, fortunately, in this part of the world, in the Asian population, we don't see that very many peristal hernias as compared to the Western world. I mean, obviously, obesity is on the rise here. The obesity is one of the main triggering causes of herniation, what are some herniation for that matter, because when there's increased abdominal pressure, it does predispose to higher tendency of herniation. So now, like I said, we can go on and talk about all kinds of avenues of addressing it. But, the way I would tackle peristomal hernia would depend firstly on how symptomatic it is, all right? And how does it bother you, right? I think that's most crucial. If someone presents to me in a hernia and it's very minimal discomfort, they just have some degree of evacuation problems, I'll probably just address that with probably modulation of the diet, for instance, or maybe some kind of stool softness and things like this. So again, the role of surgery would curtail based upon what kind of problems or symptoms they would encounter. Mm-hmm. And obviously taking measures like, for example, if they think, again, the other conservative roles would probably having a belt or some kind of support, if they can access those kind of service, if they can have access to that, there'll be another mode of addressing it. And if surgery is ever warranted, if they are having problems or, like, for example, obstruction, obviously there's definitely a need for us to address those issues. Mm-hmm. Again, it depends whether we're going to approach it from the external aspect or the internal way. And so there's always the open approach of approaching it from the outside itself, from through the stomal orifice. If there's a small defect, maybe opening up the layers itself, going down to the epineurisis, and probably just doing a primary closure. Now, this can again be done with a mesh placement or without a mesh. Mesh, as we know, they are foreign material. But again, I'm a bit reserved with mesh placements whenever I deal with fecal material, because there's tendency of mesh getting infected as well. And of course, then there's the keyhole approach, which can be done from the inside as well. So there are a lot of things, a lot of factors to address before.
A lot of variables, aren't there? Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think, Ellil, what's really interesting there about just picking up on what Dr. Mehesh is saying, and certainly the work I've done over the last few years, and I really don't want to dwell on hernias too much more in this webinar today, but one of the things I see is that patients feel some sense of responsibility or that they have caused their hernia, they've done something wrong, when for what Dr. Mehesh is saying, then potentially it's not. Maybe it's something to do with surgical technique or, and not to feel that potentially you have done something wrong or you could have prevented it because there may have not been anything that was possible. And that's certainly something I see with a lot of patients. And we know the variables of parastoma hernia development there are many, many things. But I think you're right in the sense that more education needs to be put in place. And for me, the big hitters, and Dr. Mehesh talked about it there, was, managing our weight, not smoking, but also rehabilitating the abdominal wall in a safe and appropriate way, so that we are strong enough to then go through life without creating too much pressure. So it's a little bit more education around parastoma hernias and why they occur. And I know you've had a difficult time with those. So more information for you would have been the key there, I think. Helen, can I return to you? What was missing from your kind of care right at the beginning or in your journey? Doesn't sound like anything was, because you would have asked for it, right? So
probably, yeah. I mean, if anything, perhaps the amount of information I gathered was part of the problem, because there was information in those. Yeah. Might say this and another might say this, and then another professional might say something different. So I think that was a bit of a minefield, and it perhaps would have been really useful if somebody had taken the time to say to me, this is so individual, and this list of foods that may or may not affect your stoma, it doesn't know you. The list has not been written with you in mind, and you really do need to kind of just gently create your own list through trial and error. I think knowing that what was being written wasn't necessarily specific to me. I'd never been sick in my life before, so this was a completely new area for me to have. It wasn't quite as it used to be, and I didn't like most people, you don't know what you don't know, so I just took it that everything I heard and read was relevant to me. So I think that would have been really helpful to know that what was being given in terms of information, and I hold it lightly, assess on whether it applied to me or not. And I think that one size kind of fitting all is another thing that it's important for people to bear in mind, and this is from a patient and professional point of view. Some patients will get a lot from going along to a support meeting. I went along to one, it didn't do anything for me. If anything, I just felt a bit like, I could have had a lie-in today, Saturday morning. I could have been sat at home in bed. That would have been, for me, something that perhaps I would have enjoyed and got more from. Other people, of course, support groups are an absolute lifeline, but not for anyone to feel that they should or shouldn't do any particular way of recovery. It's so individual, and I think that would have been really, it would have helped me just to hear that really reinforced.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I love when you refer to the scary list of foods, and we're all presented with this list of things that you should and you shouldn't do, and that can create so much fear, which we can then carry on through the rest of our lives, when actually what we have to do is find our own pathway through. And I love that phrase you use, is hold it lightly. So take the information, but hold it lightly, and kind of then work out what you need to do. But that comes back to having that confidence to advocate for yourself and to really listen to your body and work out what you need in your process. And I, we'll get into that in a moment about how we can help people get to that point. So thinking about kind of coming back to these healthy bonds and coming back to this feeling of isolation and those sorts of things. For me, the most challenging thing after my surgery was not being able to go running, because I was missing my running friends. That was my social network. So I was missing my running friends. They'd pop round for a cup of tea and they'd tell me about their running, and I'd get really jealous and really hate them. And I just wanted to be running. So for me, that was really difficult. I felt really isolated. I remember one day just sat on my bedroom floor sobbing because the only thing I wanted to do was go for a run. And that's not to say I couldn't. I was gradually getting back to that quite quickly. But isolation, suddenly I've got this stoma that nobody knows what it is, and all my running friends are off doing their thing and I'm not part of it anymore. And that for me, I found really, really difficult. My work as a fitness instructor, that was also my kind of life, so I wasn't doing that, and I felt like my identity had been stripped away, and I suddenly had nothing. So it was a really difficult time. So Ellil, what was the most challenging thing for you with regards to those bonds after your surgery?
Right. So for me, the most my worst fear was actually how I would get back to work because, we need to put food on the table, bring the bread home, make a day. And also to carry on with the activities that I was doing before. And so with the stoma, will I still be able to do all that? That was my biggest fear, right? Challenges-wise, I think I adapt pretty easily, right? So if there was a way I could do it, then I wouldn't really worry because I know I can do it. And really, the way I overcame it was I saw it. I saw this article in the papers showing one of our senior patient ambassadors. He was reaching his 70s then, and he had a permanent stoma, and he was playing basketball and swimming and badminton and running. And oh my God, when I saw that article, I said, "This is it. And if he can do it, then I can too." Right? So so the challenges were how I was going to go back to that kind of active lifestyle and work. And when I saw that, and I said, "Okay, this is it. And I'm going to do this," and I haven't looked back since.
That's great. And Helen, what about you? What was the biggest challenging thing for you after your surgery?
I think actually it kind of links back to the food point that I made earlier. So after my operation, because I'd been in hospital for so many weeks, mobile, I had lost a lot of weight and a lot of muscle tone. So I had a lot of rebuilding of myself to do. And my primary route to that was through food initially. And I had this conflicting thing where I knew I needed to eat really well, but I was also thinking, and I'm vegetarian, so a lot of the foods that I would have been drawn to eating and wanting to really get to, kind of foods that were on these lists that were saying, you can't do this. So that was really challenging for me, was to work out how I could have a healthy diet that was going to build me back up and help my recovery, given that I was kind of hearing from people that I really shouldn't be eating most of the things that I wanted to eat. So I think that's a massive battle.
Yeah, I think the vegetarian diet and ileostomy are the two things that kind of, you look at the scary list of foods, and as you say, that's pretty much a vegetarian diet. So yeah, navigating that. But again, that comes back to your individualized approach to recovery and having some support around that to say, actually, it is okay if you change the way you prepare that vegetable, or you cook that vegetable, you cook it in a different way, or puree it, or cook it longer, or whatever you need to do in the early stages to build your confidence back up and not be scared of eating those foods. Because actually what they're saying by doing that is challenging the very values you live by, which are your vegetarianism, which makes it really difficult. So bonds with food are also really important. So we're talking about all of the bonds around us and how having that stoma changes everything. I went through a really complex time after my first stoma surgery. I had a lot of complications and had 5 more surgeries and 3 different stomas. And there was one period where I couldn't eat solid food at all. And I remember Christmas, 2 years, I didn't eat Christmas dinner, and I just going off and have a shake in the kitchen and cook Christmas dinner for my family. And my relationship with food, I don't think has ever really recovered. I don't enjoy a social occasion with food in quite the same way as I did before. So I think, that's certainly an area that we need to look at as well. So, okay, this has been a really, really good chat so far. We've got about 16 minutes left. So I want to kind of just come to some questions. And there's some really interesting questions that are coming in. So, Helen, if I can just start with you. So as a counsellor and as a therapist, and we can perhaps all talk about this as well, and Dr. Mehesh, but I can start with you, Helen. We've had a question come in from somebody, and this, for me, is quite distressing, because this lady's had a surgery 2 years ago, and she says, "I'm still really mad at the world. What can I do?" And where do we start with that?
I mean, that sounds to me like she's still got a lot that she needs to process. This type of operation, it doesn't happen unless there's something quite seriously wrong in you, with you. And so there's so many things about it that are really frightening, and they threaten our very existence. And that's going to bring a lot of fear, a lot of loss, a lot of sadness, and a lot of anger. So all of those feelings are so natural and so overwhelming. And I think my kind of suggestion would be to really find some space where she can explore all of that and give that to somebody else to help process. So, I know I'm biased, but my suggestion would be maybe for her to find somebody like a counsellor who she can sit down with and unpack it and explore it, where she doesn't have to worry. Because I remember when I had my surgery, difficult feelings I had. I was worried about talking to my family in case I upset them or worried them, because I just wanted to show them that I was doing well. And so it's difficult sometimes to be able to confide in your friends and family, because they haven't really had that same experience, so they might not really understand, but also you don't want to burden people. I hear this a lot from my clients, I don't want to burden my family. They've been through enough already. They sat by my bedside, they watched me be sick, and now I don't want to give them any more to worry about. So I really feel like that for that lady, it would be really helpful for her to have somewhere where she can talk all of this through without worrying about burdening somebody, where she can really explore all of the emotions that are still really raging around inside her.
And those feelings are very valid, and to not just sit with it and say, I'm angry and I feel mad and this is okay, actually to try and explore it and try and find some acceptance. So you kind of recommend a counsellor, and obviously she could Google you and find you online, and I presume you're offering Zoom consultations, but I know as well that with under the kind of Convatec umbrella, counselling services available through the AmCare service as well, and that can be offered. So she could have a look at that if she can't find someone local to her. Ellil, I'm guessing you're going to say support within maybe a support group to come and, I don't know whether this is something she's tried, but she hasn't elaborated on that, but a support group maybe, do you think that's something that could help her?
Right, so I think we need to be a bit careful here, because in the support group, you find members able to, share their stories, give peer-to-peer support, but they may not have the professional skills and knowledge to do the things that Helen rightfully said this lady should be doing. But I think a well-trained ambassador should be able to pick this up, and first of all, to acknowledge her anger and acknowledge her pain. To sit with her and say, look, it's perfectly fine what you're going through, there's nothing wrong with you, and then slowly nudge her towards accepting some kind of counselling, and also show her where she can go, provide the resources for her. So I think
not necessarily just sort of patient-to-patient peer support, but somebody within a support organisation or from a charity who's maybe had some element of training and is able to have some skills to do that. And Dr. Mehesh, is that something that you get from many of your patients? They're still really angry with their stoma, or angry at having their stoma. I mean, I'm guessing with a lot of cancer patients, you may find that. And what would your advice be?
Fortunately not, but we have the occasional, situations where I totally agree. In situations like this, basically, probably they would require some expert advice rather than, the simple, peer support of some sort. Because bearing in mind that even the ET nurses, for that matter, they may be good in terms of addressing physical related issues, but not in terms of counseling services. They're not trained for such. So sometimes in extremes of situations like this, you probably need a proper counselor to address things. But I'm fortunate that a lot of times that in my practice, we've got good support services, peer support people in form of cancer survivors. We've got an entity called Colorectal Cancer Survivors Society in Malaysia. We go by the acronym called CORUM, and they're trained peer facilitators. And some of these people they've lived with stomas for almost half their lifetime. So sometimes linking them, I call them buddy links essentially, and they do help to some extent. But from the sounds of what you described, it sounds like someone who requires more specialized kind of advice.
Maybe some more professional support needed.
Sorry, if I just interrupt. Now, the other thing to emphasize on, I think, many times when it comes to the management of ostomy and so on, I think it's always important to understand. I think probably the way Ellil and Helen's mentioned, it's always basically adapting to the situation. And I believe that people can adapt it easier if they are pre-planned before surgery. So essentially, I think it's also important to focus that, we do not rush into any surgical procedure per se unless patients are prepared for it. So a preparation and getting them to adapt to the whole situation is very crucial. And obviously in certain sense, like what you had, for example, you're done in surgery as an emergency, that's a different matter altogether. The period of pre-operative preparation doesn't arise in those circumstances. So I believe that basically many times, and if you prepare a patient beforehand, no matter how long it may take, I think it's preparing them for what they may face after surgery. I think that's very crucial. So the preparatory phase is very for them to adapt and fit into the situation thereafter.
And it may be that this lady that's feeling like this didn't get any of that before surgery, or we don't really know. But if I look at this charter of Ostomates' rights, this list of bullet points, that is the number one thing, to receive pre-operative counselling to ensure that people are fully aware of the operation and what's going to happen. And I think we need to use this charter of rights more in whether we're surgeons or counsellors or volunteers, and the work that I do as a rehab professional, but also as people that live with ostomies, and to share this charter to make sure that people are using this and demanding that they get the care and support that they need, and not just to say it's okay to be mad and angry and upset and depressed. None of those things are okay, and there's support there if you look for it. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to go through a few more questions. It's a really interesting question here about how do you adjust if you're always thinking about having a reversal? Now, I remember I was rushed into having a reversal very quickly after my surgery, and then none of that went right. So there was a number of complications after that, to the point where I begged the surgeon to put my ostomy back. And for me, my quality of life was far better with my ostomy than it was without. Now, I had the opportunity of experiencing both, so I knew how to make that choice. But what if somebody's had their ostomy and they're always thinking about reversal? How do we deal with that? I don't know. Helen, what are your thoughts on that? We could talk all day about it, probably. But what are your initial thoughts on that?
Well, I had a very similar experience to you, Sarah, in that I had a reversal not long after my first operation, and also had a lot of problems, and ultimately came back to having ostomy. Said it's not something I would ever put anybody else off trying, just because I and you had that sort of very difficult experience. I would never say to somebody, don't try it. I do sometimes think, though, that there's a bit of an expectation within medical professionals, perhaps, that or within perhaps the industry as a whole, that people are going to want a reversal. Like that's inevitable. You have your stoma, but don't worry, we can give you a reversal. And that kind of already sets it up. And the reversals are better. So I think there's something for us all to kind of watch for in that, setting people's expectations. It's good to know your options, but equally that there's not one that's better than the other. They're just different.
I know one of the questions that annoys me the most is when you talk to people and you say you've got an ostomy, they'll often say, is it permanent? And I don't even know where that comes from. These are people who don't even know what an ostomy is. But that's almost one of the very first questions that people ask. Is it permanent? And you say yes. And there's almost oh, I'm so sorry. Or is it temporary? Oh, yes. Oh, great. Well, you can get rid of it. And I don't know where that comes from or why we feel the need to say that. But I think you're absolutely right, Helen. I think it comes from something within, not wanting to give people ostomies in the first place. And So how do we deal with that, though? If that's something you're feeling and you're sitting there thinking, all I can think about is getting this damn thing reversed, how does someone adjust and cope until, and now we know with COVID that might be delayed far down the line. How do people deal with that? Ellil, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. In fact, one of my pet peeves is when we do have a group of patient ambassadors, and when we visit newly diagnosed patients, and one or two of my ambassadors actually use the word, fortunately, mine was reversed. So as someone who is advocating and supporting, I felt that wasn't the right way to frame it, right? So I had addressed. But nevertheless, that is the perception that if you have one, then you're unfortunate. And I've heard horror stories of those who have had their reversals and really, really suffered. And they've told me, I'm going to have my ostomy put back. So for me, I would, usually I tell the people I support that the medical part of it, we leave it to the surgeons. but I do get them in touch with those who have had rehearsals, those who have had both, and for them to at least have that at the back of their minds. And I totally agree with Helen that it is not an option that they should not consider, because maybe, and I don't know whether I'm saying this right, maybe they should go through it before they realize that they're better off with an ostomy. Because I don't think they would believe anyone if they told them that, look, you're better off with one, don't go for the reversal. Yeah, so to me, I'll just make the stories available. Yeah.
There's something bigger, though, isn't there, about sort of living in the present and living in the moment. And I'm sure Helen will have something to say about this. But whatever we're dealing with, whether it's an ostomy and we're waiting for reversal or hoping for reversal or whatever it is we're dealing with in life, there's something about acceptance and being in the moment and being present with where we are right now. And we can't necessarily look too far forwards. Is that something, Helen, that you're nodding, I'm hoping?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, even if you accept the stoma and you're okay with it, or you work to become okay with it for the time that you've got it, even if you're expecting a reversal, that doesn't mean that the reversal is then not going to happen or it's not going to be successful. It just means that the time between now and then is hopefully going to be a bit more bearable and a bit more comfortable for you. So I believe that people almost put off their acceptance of the stoma because they know that maybe something better is coming. They're not mutually exclusive. You can wait for the better thing and work to be okay with the thing you've got at the same time.
100%. And I see this with people who will say, oh, well, I'll get back to exercise once I finished all my chemo and I've had my reversal and I've put that all to bed, then I can get my life back. And actually, I'm saying to people, you need to be exercising during this treatment and whilst you've still got your stone, because this is going to really help your recovery. And so, it's like, don't wait until it's gone. And you've got to live now and live in this moment and find a way to do that, I think. Here's a really interesting question here, and probably specifically maybe for Helen. If you're listening to this or you are feeling very alone and very despondent, it's very difficult to reach out for help and to reach out. But how would you recommend that people do that? But all of you actually, what would your recommendations be if someone's feeling very low? What's the very first step to take? Helen first.
I think about when you've had difficult things happen to you in the past, and who have you spoken to about that? Where do you naturally turn for support and solace when you're finding something tricky? Because this probably isn't the first tricky thing that you've experienced in your life. So go there first, and from there, see, if you need more kind of cheerleading to take the first step to reach out for a counsellor or go to a support group meeting or whatever. Gather your already existing support network around you, and kind of utilize what you hold you. And sometimes it's internal, sometimes it's not other people, sometimes it's just your internal resource, things that have got you through difficult. Kind of draw on that first and use that as your foundation, your springboard for accessing whatever else it is that you need to do now.
Yeah. And Ellil, what would you say to someone who's really struggling? They're feeling very alone and they're struggling to take that first step. How do they reach out? Because that's often the hardest thing to do, isn't it? When you're feeling like that, is to reach out for support. Where would you?
That's right. And for me, I think I'll probably rope in the caregiver, if there is one, and sort of make the connection and tell them that, look, there's help available. Why don't you just nudge them towards talking to this person? Just have a chat. So that we can direct them to the right help. And also the stoma nurses, if assuming there's no caregiver and they are alone, and when they go for their follow-ups, tell the stoma nurse, if you see something like this, just try and hook them up with one of us, and we can sit down and chat with them, and then get them the help that they need. Because if they, by themselves, can't do it, then they need to be nudged towards it.
Yeah. And I think there's some merit in, and this is where perhaps there's merit in some online Facebook groups where people can post sort of slightly more anonymously and reach out for help, knowing that people don't really know them that well, but they can still reach out for some advice and support. But I think that also needs to be handled carefully, because within groups there can be a lot of misinformation. But certainly that might be an idea where people could perhaps start. And Dr. Mehesh, what would your advice be to somebody who's feeling really alone? I mean, where would they start?
I think just in addition to what has been mentioned by Helen and Ellil, I think probably the role of family support is going to be very crucial. I think just an added adjunct as well, because they're the people who will be living with you, so you're surrounded with those family members per se. So it's also important to get them involved as well in whatever qualms that the patient may have. So it's not just peer support with the ostomate, with the ET nurses and so on, but also basically I think the family or members who are living with them, I think they have to be enrolled into the whole caretaking process as well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Well, it looks like we are out of time. So I think that was a really, really interesting conversation. I hope you've all enjoyed participating. I hope you've all enjoyed listening to it. It can be very difficult living with an ostomy, but I think if we try and think about that video at the beginning and thinking about the bonds around us, the bonds with our stoma, with our food, with our friends, families, and how we can put those things in place and reach out to people that can support us. So thank you to Ellil, Helen and Dr. Mehesh, just from the truly global corners of the world for being here today. And on behalf of Convatec, to you all, thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, and happy World Ostomy Day for tomorrow, the 2nd of October. Thank you.
Thank you.